preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There is not a podium, so I'm going to have to speak to you without a mic. Is that all right? Yeah. Oh, good. I'm Omus Hirschbahn. I'm Director of Arts and Humanities here at the 92nd Street Y, and it's rare that I get a treat and be able to come before you all. Dan Stern is in California setting up a variety of wild cooperative programs. I can't wait for that. Now, I'd like to welcome you. That's the first part of this. You know, you're a very special audience. It occurs to me that you reflect, in a sense, the wise mission, which, when I'm asked, I tend to say that it's educational in nature, because whether it's concerts or lectures or an event like this, it is an educational experience, perhaps more than in other places. And it's a serious audience, and we're very, very pleased about that. Let me tell you, the moderator of Artist Visions is a favorite of yours, and that's, of course, Patterson Sims. He's the Associate Director of Art and Exhibitions and the Curator of Modern Art to Seattle Art Museum. He's been there since 1987, and it occurs to me that all of these good people leave New York and they go to Seattle. As you may know, the director of our orchestra, the New York Chamber Symphony, Gerard Schwartz, is the director of the Seattle Symphony. They have lunch together. I never see either of them. In any case, he, as you may know, was Associate Director of the Permanent Collections Whitney here in New York. And he curated the exhibition 20th Century American Art, highlights of the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum, many other important exhibitions. And also Figure as Subject, the revival of figuration since 1975, which was circulated to 5 major museums. He's a prolific lecturer and writer. He's lectured all over America, Canada, England, Japan, many other countries. He's written brochure and catalog text for many, many exhibitions, certainly all of those that he's done. He sits, and this made me very happy, he sits on the board of Santa Fe Musical Festival, which now is in between the 2 cities that he seems to inhabit. I'm glad that he came from Seattle. I'm so happy that he's here, and I want him, if he's ready, to come out here with tonight's special guest, Jackie Winsor. He will be telling you about Miss Winsor. Enjoy the evening.
The reason why you're here is to hear Jackie and to see the slides that she has brought together. She will go through the slides 2 times. Once to let you get a sense of her imagery and her work as it emerges from the late 1960s to the present. And the second time to sort of give more commentary. Maybe I'll sort of intersperse with a few questions. Jackie is originally from Canada. She was born in 1941 in St. John's, Newfoundland, and came to this country in the mid-60s. She first came to the Yale Summer School. The year after that, she went to Mass College of Art and then got her degree in 1967 from Rutgers. About 2 years after that time, she began the work that she'll be showing tonight. Her first exhibition was at the Paula Cooper Gallery in Soho, where so many of you have seen her subsequent shows. She continues to show there, and she has a piece on view in a beautiful group exhibition of work of a kind of minimalist aesthetic at the present time. In 1979, she had a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, and her work has been shown extensively here and abroad. As you'll see, she is a person who has consistently been involved in making sculpture, making it herself, and I turn you over to this evening's purpose, Jackie.
Thank you, Patterson. Before I show the slides, I'd like to tell you what I'd like to add to how the program is run, which you probably know more than I do if you come often. I'd like to run through the slides all the way through from beginning to end. So if someone is not familiar with the work, that there'll be no surprises, that you just know what it all is. And then I'll run through the slides again a second time, and Patterson and I will talk about the work. And the reason I like to run through the slides, my voice is echoing here, I hear it. The reason I like to run through the slides the first time like that is in my experience making work and looking at work, it seems that what the work is about isn't really what the slides are about. And what the work is about isn't really word for word what gets said here. As a matter of fact, you can sound very smart after you make the work, but very often the biggest experience that you have in making it is how much you don't seem to know. And it seems much like groping in the dark a good lot of the time. However, one format that we have is getting together and talking about things. So the closest thing, it seems to me, to a bit of that experience anyway is letting the work just have its own moment. Its own moment without kind of being packed in with words all the way around it. So I'd like to just sort of go through all the slides, and you can sort of see, the work. and then we'll just, do the format that we're here for. Also, before we get going to seeing the slides, there's one other thing that I thought I would say, rather than talking about individual pieces per se and what I sort of thought around each one of them. One of the things I thought I'd like to say a little bit about was I've been making work in New York for, 22 years or something like that. And I've made it all through my school training before that. And one thing that's interested me about other people who've made work, early on, looking at artists that are older than myself, and I've asked myself a lot, is what is it you get out of making it? And that has changed over the years, what I feel like I've gotten out of making it. One of the things I feel that over and over again that I've gotten is this sort of lesson I seem to learn. And I have this little anecdote about what happened to me when I was in school. When I was going to Massachusetts College of Art, I was sort of one of their star painters, myself and a couple others, and I was selected to go to Yale Summer School, and I don't have any knowledge of being consciously formulating any ideas or anything. I just painted and I went off to summer school. And when I went to summer school, for the first time I was confronted with something that I didn't know how to do. There were just trees everywhere, and I had to figure out what to paint. And I spent a horrible 6 weeks, as most people did, trying to figure out how to do something there. When I was in undergraduate school, everyone painted from figures, and so that was the format. And then all of a sudden, the format was trees, and there was nothing sitting in the middle for you to do. So for 6 weeks, as I said, I struggled. Everything was horrible. I knew it was horrible. But somewhere near the end, something started to take place. And there are a couple of things. The paintings began to look better. But what emerged out of it was a kind of interest in form that hadn't been there before. As a young painter, I was completely, I was just in love with the smell of turpentine and paint, I suppose, and all the kind of soupy this and whatever that went along with it. And all of a sudden, what was emerging was, something far simpler. But anyway, I finished my 8 weeks at summer school and then back to my regular school, and I just sort of, in my stupidity, I suppose, just assumed I could just go back to what I was doing before. And I think it was my first big lesson that I started. It took a few years to learn it. The first big lesson is I got back and nothing worked again. Here I was doing the thing that I did so well before, painting figures, and they were all horrible. And it's like, and I just couldn't make them any better. And I just sort of tried to apply something that happened to go all right during the summer school. It failed, and it just went on and on. It just failed and failed and failed. Well, I was smart enough to know, because the time was coming to go to graduate school. I knew they were so horrible that I would never get in, given what I had done. And I couldn't understand why this thing that I seemed to know, and seemed it was mine in some way, in all my little egotistical, whatever. I thought it was mine, and all of a sudden it failed me. I just couldn't seem to do it anymore. And anyway, so I got to graduate school on the work that I did before I went to summer school. and and during the first year at graduate school, the same thing was there. And what I did is I just consciously made a decision that something had to happen, or I might as well quit all this stuff. And what I did is I just sort of started looking at what I was doing and started eliminating what I truly loved there, but didn't seem to have anything to do with what I seemed to be doing. So I eliminated the soupy paint, and I started eliminating some of the color, and I started simplifying the forms, and anyway, simplified down, so I was no longer using paint, and I eventually stopped using canvas, and I'd have these beautiful clean canvases around the room, and I had these big pots of paint, and I would take the covers off and look at them and put them back on. And and finally, when I got around to doing something that started to be okay, what I realized that where I was at that moment in summer school when things finally started to work, when forms started emerging. And what I didn't do at that point is I simply didn't follow the work. I thought the work should follow me, and I was going back to school, and it should come back to school too. And I didn't follow it, and it was the first big lesson I learned, and it sort of repeated itself. But I learned it early on. I learned it enough, and so that it's supported me the most since then. And it's the thing I think that it's repeatedly that I've learned in the work, and that is simply to follow where it takes you. And so where it's taken me, a good lot haven't been places that I sort of suspected I would ever be, and or doing things that I would have ever imagined I would have done. And so what it seems to me my job has been in relationship to following it and doing what I should do is simply get what it's saying to me after I make it, after I follow it and make it, to get what it has to say in return, and that has been consistently throughout the work. So with that, we'll see where it's taken me. So. Yeah, if you just lower the lights, we can show the slides. As I said, I'll just go through all of them. So I think we can rerun them and put the lights up. Should I ask them to put them through?
They'll start them very quickly. The lights can go down a bit so we can see the slides.
Okay, that's fine.
This is an installation shot. Jackie, would you tell us a little bit about the show? I think it's at Paula Cooper.
No, this one isn't.
Where?
This was at the Portland Center for the Visual Arts.
PCVA.
Yeah.
Do you like seeing your works together? They're obviously made with such a tremendous and strong sense of individuality. When you see a lot of them interacting that way, do you think it compromises them?
Oh, no, at all. The pieces, I think, are very self-contained, and they hold themselves separate from most everything. But it's nice seeing them together because they weren't made together, and you haven't, to see what pieces over a period of time have in common.
Did we see every single one of your works?
Not quite, but this. No, this is a couple pieces outdoors that weren't included, and a few here and there.
That is one aspect of your work that, in a sense, initiated some of your ideas, the outside work. Yet your work has stayed inside since that time, and you haven't made works that are either site responsive or more publicly oriented since. How is it that your work sort of started in that mode and has never returned there again?
Well, actually, it never started there. I think the pieces, because they have natural elements in it that you might be suspicious of that, but it's not really the case. How I originally started using rope actually was quite a fluke. And one of the things I started using when I stopped painting was polyester resin. And I discovered it was toxic and it wasn't a good idea to use. And I gave myself a year to stop using it. And in the interim period, I went around looking for a lot of other things that I might want to work with. And in my goings and comings, I met a man who had this big chunk of rope that happened to be on TV, and he used to like to show it to me because it had been on some waterfront movie or whatever, and it was his favorite. But it did seem to take up an enormous amount of space, and he sold trapeze equipment, so there were things with rope around, and this just happened to be what he had. And after I'd come back a few times, I don't remember what I was buying, but after I'd come back a few times, he liked me enough, and he also wanted the corner that the rope was in, and I became the owner of the waterfront material. And so I dragged it home, and I had it in my studio for a year, and I liked it. It just seemed too big, and it was 4-inch rope, and it just... it was out of scale with what I was working with at the time, and although I liked it a lot, I didn't quite know what to do with it. So I just simply would have it over in one corner, and I'd be working over this other spot, and then I'd fill up that spot a bit, and I'd want that corner, and so I'd drag it over to the other corner, and as I dragged it about, I got more involved in it. However, it took its time, and I had it in the studio for about a year before I could figure out what to do with it. And so, in a way, it was sort of natural things, but it wasn't the great outdoors or anything like that.
But you have made some pieces out of doors.
Yes, but, the pieces had already sort of evolved and taken on a form before outdoors kind of came into to be part of it. And even though they have a lot in common, it isn't where they originated.
From.
Yeah.
There's another installation shot, isn't there?
Yeah, this one's later. It's in Toronto.
One of the features that always, a question that I often want to ask artists, and it's so great that I can have a format when I can do it and they sort of have to answer, is what do you want people to see when they look at these works of art? You really gave people a wonderful opportunity to have their minds flood with the responses to your work by silently showing it. But if you could direct their minds, if you could say, this is what I want you to think or see, this is the feelings that I have and I feel are compressed in these pieces, could you clarify that?
Yes, well, we're all very gregarious creatures, and we love to chat and tell stories. And however, it seems to me that we have a lot of social time to do that, and what one makes work about isn't about that, although we do it a lot. And so when I was making these pieces early on, one of the things that I wanted to do is to give that more gregarious part of you something to do. It likes to have something to do. So, in the early pieces of the rope, there's just 500 strings or something, and there's a knot that moves around. It's not a lot to do, but it doesn't take much. Just a little something to keep your mind busy and have you follow around it. But actually, what I was more interested in is the stillness of those rope pieces, that there wasn't a lot to look at, that it's just sort of holding its space, and it really are just a place for you to go hold your space and be quiet. So I sort of wanted to have just enough activity to keep you there and keep you interested, and just quieten down, so that it isn't always about dealing with outside issues, but beginning to deal more with, issues that don't have so much identity to them, so much outer self to them. And so the earlier ones that I was most interested in is, relating simply to your body. Your body has a lot of knowledge in it, just all by itself, and very often we have very little access consciously to half of that knowledge. So they sort of want to bring you back to your body, right? Reminding you of your body, and settling into that. And later, and also I would do these other little things in the pieces, like some of the earlier pieces. There's a piece with wrapped corners, and in a piece like that, I was interested. Not only what you identified with that held you there, and not only that it was physical and had a kind of presence about it, but there's a kind of trust that would be established. The corners are wrapped, the rope is heavy, the wood is heavy. You sort of relate to a kind of trust you have in it. What's going on inside those corners, and it's sort of done a lot, so it obviously went on for a while, and you just building up a kind of security about being there with them. And then what you get to look at actually in those pieces, if I proceed, maybe we'll come across one of them. What you get to see actually is, in that big square one, is just an empty white wall, unless you start looking up around in it. And so it's interested in bringing the attention to inside the rope, which is something that you basically don't get to see. And so as it pulls you inside it, it has a little tendency to pull you inside yourself, right? Just sort of let it kind of sink into you. And so I wanted the pieces to be not thought about very much, actually. I wanted them to kind of quiet you down. And I wanted them to be very slowly revealed, to be quiet, something that you could be with. It's nice to have, parties and all, but actually the person you get to live with is the one that you learn to be quiet with. And I wanted the work to be able to be quiet with it. And those are sort of the beginnings ideas.
There's a quality to certain objects that you've made, especially at this stage in your work, that is very simple, primal, almost primitive, as if they might come from some other culture. Would you want people to think that in some way? Would you want them to know they were made by a modern woman? Or would you want them to think that they could exist in any range of other kinds of cultures?
I was trying as hard as I could. These were my expert efforts, you see. I wasn't trained as a sculptor, I was a painter. And I was working on figuring it all out. What I was interested in here, it's always sort of very physical, among other things, and I wanted to have a kind of muscularity about them. I don't think it's a very gender-oriented thing. I somehow have never really felt my work is very gender-oriented. If anything, if there's a kind of separation between one and another, the separation, I'd say, is more about dealing with an outer aspect of myself and a kind of inner aspect of myself. I wasn't sort of interested in other cultures. I was interested in kind of different ways to kind of represent a part of me or part of my body, right? To ground you in your body. These are all these little kind of muscular shapes, right? They're like little biceps or something. I wanted the kind of muscular quality of the wood, the little saplings, and the knots to have a kind of equivalency, right? And I don't think that probably and other cultural things might have had those kind of interests. They're using natural elements, and they're using them in a very simple fashion. It was as complex as I was at the time. You know what I mean? That was where the interests were, like all those singular units of the rope making up a bigger unit, and the kind of other units all being together, so these clustering of units together.
But these pieces have a kind of intentional crudity, it seems to me, or a suggestion that the distance from nature is somewhat more collapsed than some of your later work. I mean, this particular piece had a very lively life, as we both remember, because it's it's owned by the Whitney Museum, and it became infested with bugs.
It did? I didn't know that. Bugs?
Yeah, little bugs. And those bugs were causing a kind of dry rot inside as well. I mean, the piece was having a lot of problems. And our registrar, who is a sensible person confronting a lot of people who aren't so sensible, like curators and artists, became alarmed by the fact that this piece was doing a very dramatic evolution. In fact, all of its bark was dropping off. And so I think
it's a bit of an exaggeration.
Well, I was given the challenge of calling Jackie in sort of a gentle way, saying, this piece, it's sort of different from what we originally acquired. And how do you feel about that? And
He's trying to provoke me.
do you take any responsibility for that? And she, in her usual responsible way, arrived and helped the piece and gave it a more permanent, impermanent life.
Well, I remember that a little bit differently than he does. The piece was not kiln dried as you buy wood from the lumber yard. It was from the woods, right? And it was not kiln dried. And in my studio, which also had no heat, it didn't have a life that was much different than it did outdoors, so things were fine. When it went to the museum is dehumidified. And so when the piece got there, to protect the artwork, this wood had not gone through that, through any process of going through a kiln or any such thing. And so it dried, and the wood shrank. And when it shrank a bit away from the bark. So we just simply aided nature a little bit and rejoined it.
Well, she did a fantastic job. Twice.
There were no bugs.
We should probably move on to the next piece. Could you describe how this piece, because I remember when I first saw it, and then it was bought by somebody I knew, how it was made, because I think it gives people a sense of this tremendous tremendous level of activity that is required for making what seem to be very quiet works of art.
Well, this piece, I think there's about nine layers of wood, and the first two I just nailed together here, and I nailed together there, and then I put another one on top and nailed it, and moved over, nailed here, and moved. And what I wanted to do, although, as I said, I was sort of learning how to do things as much as anything then, having not studied much on that. I mean, I was a painter. I wanted to kind of bring the wood back to the kind of state that I wanted to get it in. If you kind of, rather than an image of what it looked like, but a kind of state I wanted to feel like when it was completed, is I wanted to take the wood, which once it's lumbered, is completely lost all its kind of vigor that it has out in nature. And so even though it maintained the form of the lumbering, I wanted to bring the energy back into the wood. And so I also wanted to to join it with something else and have those two kind of come together as one unit. So the nails and the wood I used, and I just sort of packed the wood in nails to the point where it couldn't take anymore. And I just sort of packed and packed it. At the time, I didn't know how many it would take. It was I wanted to splinter the wood, get to the point where they affected each other the way people affect each other. And the wood was very soft, and it absorbed far more than I thought it would. So in the end, it was about 50 pounds of wood, and I know it was 50 pounds of nails because it just went on and on. And so finally I built up enough nails in the wood so that the layer that went on would hit the layer below, and it would begin to create a little tension across the top. So you could see that the kind of struggle between it all took place, although it isn't very...
but so the surface along the top of that piece...
It's the same as the bottom.
Yeah, it's the same as the bottom. It's a surface of nails.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems as if it might have some sort of texture, even be painted in some way, but those are all the studs, the tops of nails, which are causing that. So there really are hundreds, perhaps thousands of nails in the piece.
50 pounds of nails is a lot. I mean, this is about 10 pounds.
Yeah. As we move on to the next piece, the issue that, or pieces that come to mind quickly
Hurry.
is sort of minimalism. And where do you place yourself? I mean, the last work, which is several works ago now, that last work, this is one way to get me not to ask this question, deals with a sort of minimalist aesthetic.
There's a lot more slides.
Minimalist aesthetic. Where do you really place yourself in relation to that sort of omnipresent art movement of the 1960s and early 70s?
Well, just like living now, you're sort of always a product of what's around, and it was around. So it wasn't really the concerns that were around with minimal art, just sort of weren't my concerns, although the images in simple forms, when you take a tree, you have a simple form. So this kind of simple forms that I use are there. But what seemed to me, my interest were, I wanted to take the most elementary thing and humanize it in some way, or to engage it in either a kind of activity or a history, or in this particular case here, there's like 600 pounds of rope that's in this, and it took 6 months and a couple people to do it, right? It just, it's like packing the rope. And in a way, how I felt about making the piece and where my interest and concerns were, although they are, once again those, it was a square of 4 logs that were about this big around. It made a space in the middle about this big when they were together. And I wanted to fill up the center area, and it took that much rope and those large sphere on all of them to kind of fill up that little space that was in the middle. And the interest is sort of like making this history, or it's not like marking time, but including time, just like, you look around at people and they're just filled with all these days, like I'm filled with all these days. And there are events in those days, but after, 2 or 3 days have passed, you don't remember half of those events. And there's an accumulation. It makes a history, not of spectacular events, but of an accumulation. And it was my sense, after having made some of these pieces, that kind of equation of my time and the time of the piece that was needed for doing it slowed down the perceptions of peace and made it very, very slow, made you very slow being with it. And it was part of what I wanted to use to make the pieces very quiet, to be sort of like sleeping figures or something like that. They had potential in them, but they weren't acting it out. That it was all there, you knew it, and you simply just didn't disturb it. And so those, as far as I know, weren't minimalist concerns. But the images have
that outward appearance.
Have that outward
well,
appearance.
I've always made an equation between your sculpture and the paintings of Agnes Martin, in that they're both works which are a highly romantic and deeply personal minimalism that really does slow you down in a certain way, does make you terribly aware of this labor-intensive activity. Because I think the reason why one probably can't walk past this particular piece that quickly is you just realize that somebody labored over it to the degree they did. It does send out that message?
Well, I think the pieces, as a result of it, they psychically occupy a bigger space than they physically occupy. They pull you into their center in some way. They pull you into, even if how it's pulled in is kind of through your mind, knowing that. Whatever it is, they become formal things that pull you in. And the center of the focus is the center of the piece, which you sort of don't see. And it somehow makes the pieces feel like they occupy a lot of space. They make them very self-contained. And as I said, the main feeling quality that I wanted enough there to engage you, and I wanted to kind of quieten you. So if anything, it's not like it's silence per se, but quietening you down to make you sort of settle into your body, to be there without a lot of thoughts. It's kind of almost the opposite of entertainment. I mean, some things that are very pleasant that aren't particularly entertaining is sitting in a bathtub or something. You know, it's just pleasant, wanting to be there, and it doesn't have a lot of verbal currency. There isn't a kind of a lot that you can say, oh, this happened and that happened in the movie, and oh, there, you know. It's very simple. You can describe it simply, but it's not the experience. It's just a description that holds an image for you. And
Now, this is one of the few pieces where one could make an equation with a kind of bodily reference and see the twine as hair, and see it as a kind of quartet, say, of figures. And some other artists who've used so-called fiber in their so-called fiber art, in work such as theirs, there is an equation between this use of fiber and hair. Could you ever have a kind of figurative connotation in looking at a work like this?
well, as I said, they are to the degree that I wanted them muscular. So they do relate that way. Now, these muscles, so to speak, are this big around. They're huge. And I mean, it has as much a resonance back to wood, where it sort of came from, thistle. You know, because it looks more like wood when it starts to be that large, right? And it's not fine like hair. It doesn't have any of that. It's fiber. It's coarse, right? It's unraveled 4-inch rope, and its own physical strength, because it has a tensile strength of something like 250,000 pounds, or something, 250,000, I don't know, some huge amount, I don't remember anymore. But it was huge, pulled huge boats. and somehow inherent in it is the strength that it has, and that it's sitting there. And I think that it's somehow those kind of potentials just sitting there quietly, they're really far more the interest than displaying the material. If anything, in the use of those, what my interest were my painting interest from, years before. And that is, the painting interests were like in color and line and things like that. And in early interest in using the rope was that there were all these lines that made up these shapes, that made up these bigger shapes, that you sort of eye follow the way you followed a line when you drew, right? And those were earlier ones. After a while, you just sort of assume things, like you sort of carry this sort of little suitcase with you of all your previous things and things that you've worked with that are close to you, and you continue. Some drop off, and others sort of continue with you. And so it's some of the things that have come out of painting that I carried with me. And when I purchased rope for these pieces, there's this huge warehouse in Brooklyn, and it was, it was full city block large. And I would go in, and one of the earlier pieces, it's mountain climbing rope, and it has, 2 colored threads that go through it. And it was very light, and the form was very rounded, and I wanted it because of the scale of how small they were. And other pieces were all chewed up in black, and the forms were very indistinct, and I chose those. And I chose them really as much for the drawing interest in this kind of chunky material as anything. And so, if anything, I would say that it came out of these drawing and painting interests that, were there, rather than the things that sculpturally were there before, and that was a lot of kind of carving and things like that. It was constructing things the way you construct things when you drew and painted.
Now, you get to some of these same issues in the wire pieces, which are coming up.
What?
Well, the same issues that you're
Yeah,
talking
right.
about in terms of a quality of detail. In these pieces, if we can stop for a second, you begin to introduce a shape, this 3 foot by 3 foot cube, which engaged you for an extremely long period of time, which you just seem to be coming out of now. Could you talk about that space in the sense of sort of containment in the space?
Somewhere along the line, I was very interested in equivalence, equivalent this and equivalent that, either equivalent weights or things coming together and merging and being one, and whatever this looks like when you look at it. What I was interested in, and I had been for a while, is trying to get something that was 50 this and 50 that. And in this particular one, I wanted air to be solid in the piece, right? And this one is the one I finally felt like I finally did it. I had tried it, many of them, and I felt I had, but this one got to it. So the air was as strong an element as the wood was in the piece, because the wood holds the air, and both of them form it. And actually, the active, when you participate in the piece, the active area is the openings that you see. And when you peek in, I think the first installations that I showed, there's a way that this form, which is pretty solid, as you go from this little eye peeking spot and you move back from it, the little hole that you saw begins to open up, and finally you get a circle that's as big as a square, and you see all this light passing through it, and form somewhat dissolves. And those kind of things of like having it being very solid, and at the same time as another moment it can dissolve, interested me, and I was interested that air became a solid material in the piece, and part of how it got to do that is with the grid. It eventually became a form that would do it, or the first time I felt pleased that I had accomplished that was this piece when it done.
You don't make preparatory drawings for your works.
Oh, I did like little
Tiny
cartoon
sketches.
drawings, yeah.
But you've never displayed any drawings.
Well, I once showed some that I believe that you saw, but what they were is I had somebody sitting next to me trying to show them what I was going to do, and I just sort of sketched out these little things that were a kind of substitute for talking about them, and I was sort of going over areas that they found difficult to kind of picture, and so they're just like little details, working them out.
Yeah, and so the point I guess I would make by saying that is that in a way these pieces don't evolve in a manner that one would assume initially that there's a drawing and then they move to execute that drawing idea. They really are experienced or made in the experience of making them.
Yeah, but I think that when you have, as the way it gets expressed, I teach and I hear it all the time, I have this idea, is how it gets said, right? Well, when you just sort of have some little flash on where you want to move something, or however it comes to you like that, you want to remember it. If you have a dream and you want to remember it, guess what? You write it down and you tell somebody, right? And so you just jot it down someplace in the, whatever. However it is that you have a way of maintaining whatever the image or whatever you want to work with, it seems to me it always comes a bit in flash, right? Or if you come to an area that's difficult, it still comes to you in flash what you're going to do with it. I mean, you may reject whatever pops into your consciousness in this flash, but all then that you have to do is remember it. And remember what that was, and so it seems to me, even if you had a way of working that was so-called more expressionistic, there's certain things that are predictable within a certain area, and the way the whole thrust of the thing is going to be is the flash, right? And how each little thing gets managed or maneuvered may differ according to the needs of that moment, but the thrust of it seems to me, it's simply there.
Now we've moved outside.
Briefly.
The wire pieces came after the twine or the rope pieces, and the seductions of the material always were what drew many people to them. Did you find the material seductive, and can you sort of describe what it was like to work with it? Because it was hardly as easy as it was to work with a twine or rope.
Well, maybe I should just describe how I finally got around to doing one of those pieces. I was asked to do this commission in Princeton, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I take a fairly long time to kind of do anything, and so and it was going to be outdoors, and so I would go and visit this house in Princeton and sit around, and I did it many times all winter long, and you know, you have a concern about this whatever you're going to do lasting a little bit, and I looked around the property, and there's this, you know, beautiful house from turn of the century, and there's a, you know, big lawn area in front and back, and there's sculpture here and there, and none of it seemed to have the quality that I wanted, even, you know, to have a piece there. I just sort of want a little quiet corner someplace. And so after I went there long enough, I found a spot. And I liked the part I liked was that in the wintertime you could see through all the trees. So there was basically a large rectangle. There was a house in the middle of it, kind of blocking part of it, and then there was property around it was trees, and most of it was sort of overgrown, and there was a little vegetable garden a bit here and there. Anyway, what I liked about the trees around is that when you're in the house in the wintertime, you could see through the trees, and you could see anything that was in there. And there's this sort of rock in there, and you could see it. And in the summertime, when all the foliage was out, you couldn't see it, but you know, you could go into it if you made a slight effort. And the thing that I wasn't so fond of about the pieces that were out in the lawn and the garden is that they were there all the time, and there was no way that they had a quality of changing about them. They were just there, and they were there, and the weather came, went, and they're there, and they're just always too available, you know. And so I wanted something a little less available, so you sort of knew that you wanted to go see this thing, right? So I wanted to then build a piece over by this rock, so you sort of knew where you're going, over by the rock, but I didn't know what I was going to do. But I found the spot, and I knew that I wanted it so that it was available by wintertime when it was cold. You may not want to go out, and you could find it very easily in the summertime, just with a little bit of effort. And then I didn't know what to make it with, and I started checking out all kinds of materials and what I wanted it to look like and whatever. And, you know, I just got a lot of materials, and I got aluminum wire, and I got copper wire. It happened to be the time I finally kind of settled down to what I wanted to use was the copper, and I settled down to this one particular thing, and then I tried to get it. And it was the time when there was a blocking of copper coming into, it was only available for sale to big companies, and it wasn't individuals, and I don't remember all the hullabaloo about it, but I couldn't get it. And I went to the collector, and I said, you know, a year had already passed. I said, you know, I sort of have an idea for the piece, I just can't seem to get the material. And so I told him I wanted to use copper wire, and, you know, that was the one I thought I'd like to use, and I wanted to use it with the saplings that were in around the neighborhood, and I wanted copper wire to be similar in size, and, you know, so I described this to him, and he said, do you by any chance know what business I'm in? It's electrical wire, it's copper. So that's how it kind of came about that I, in the end, used it. He got it for me, and you know, another half year later, I managed to make it. and I also got enough and wanted to do something else and had it, and then I felt like I had done all I wanted to do with it.
Ran out of copper.
Yeah, it was very difficult to use because the material slipped. But again, it's like you learn how to pack it, and packing the rope. What was difficult about packing the rope is that you'd work very hard all day, and you'd exhaust yourself tugging on this rope, and you'd come home and come back the next day, and the whole thing loosened itself. It sort of like sags on yourself. And so you do it and do it, pack it and pack and pack, and finally you can build it so that it's tight enough. Well, this, on the other hand, doesn't want to do anything, and it'll just spring on you. And so you simply had to learn how to do it so it wouldn't spring. So there's a certain way that I figured out how to do it so it locks it into itself. They look the same, but it was completely different using it. But again, the concerns weren't so
you
different.
made 3 pieces using this kind of wire?
No, I think I only
More?
made 2.
Oh. Because you used the long one and then the shorter one, I thought. Doesn't matter, but
Not this one, too. The other one.
I think
No,
there's
this
I think
one.
there's another one.
No, there isn't. That's not.
Yeah, because that's the
That's
point
wood again.
Yeah. Go on. These begin the cubes where you interpenetrate in a very obvious way and made these lines of light that go through the pieces, and suddenly the bulk of the piece was really transformed by the small openings, top, bottom, and all 4 sides. And suddenly there was a kind of lightness to the works. This particular piece is on view at the Equitable branch of the Whitney Museum at the moment, in an ongoing installation of sculpture from the permanent collection from the 60s to the present at the Whitney, and then across the hall in a changing exhibition are 2 more pieces, which we'll see slides of a little bit later. So there are 3 other works of Jackie's that are on view in the city at the moment.
I suppose what had me make these in the first place, and if back to what I said in the beginning, the work takes you where it wants to take you, and you simply get to follow where it goes. When I started making these, it came out of 2 things coming together. One was that I took a section of the 50-50 of wood, the little window, and sort of blown up in a way. The other was that I had this sort of reoccurring dream that I kept having, and I put the 2 together, this kind of more formal interest, and I took this other one. And the dream that I kept having over and over again was that I'd be in this studio of mine, and there'd be a little tiny kind of speck of light on the wall, and I would go and kind of scratch at this until I made an opening, and on the other side there's this wonderful room of light. And I had the dream many times, and I'd open it, go into it. It was my own little private room, and it always was very blissful, the light in the room. Anyway, so it's not like I illustrated that or anything, but that was going around at the same time. And I wanted to make this interior room. I wanted the piece to be kind of stubbornly physical in there, right? And the sheetrock piece is 1,000 pounds of sheetrock, right? Just sort of sits there, right? Holds the space. And yet when you go close to it and peek through, it's like it's physicalness sort of disappears into this little kind of peephole that you get to see. And it just disappears, actually, in doing that. And it just becomes this little kind of ethereal bit of light that's kind of around it. And when you move away, it kind of regains its physicalness and holds it again. And what I liked about that was it's very much like, the relationship that you have with your body. You're very aware of it and self-conscious of it a lot of times, and it gets you around here and there. But when you close your eyes, it sort of disappears, and you don't have it any longer. And when you open it, there it is back again. You're self-conscious and moving and doing all these sort of external things. And so what I liked about the pieces is that, just for that little fleeting moment, that it disappears, all of it disappears, and then it all comes back again, in a way just making you a bit more aware of it, just.
Can you show some other examples of those
sure, they go
cubes?
on.
Yeah. This one's been burnt.
Well, when I got to this point where I was doing, I got interested in the kind of partnership in the pieces and rather than having 50% air and wood as I had before, I was kind of interested in the unknown and the known, or form and force. And the form was the cube at that time. I had done it 2 or 3 times, so I sort of knew what it was. And it was very solid in there. And the unknown, what I didn't know, or something that had, much more unknown qualities to me, or the force entering this kind of solid thing. So what I chose was fire, and put it together with something that doesn't have a natural partnership with, and that's concrete. And I wanted to see if I could kind of have them merge together, again, much like the nails and the plank, so that they existed so much as one when they were together that you just didn't think about them apart. Even though they don't normally have a natural partnership that way. The other thing was that I was kind of interested in, things get to be finished, when they're nice, they're finished. And I wanted it to go beyond finished when they get wrecked and ruined and destroyed and die and all those things. And I wanted to include all that. We know those events in our lives. We've all sort of been dragged through it at times. And I wanted to include those kind of experiences. And so the finished, complete, or the beautiful, or whatever, got to be at the end of that. After those, I wanted the piece to go through an event and come out, with the record of that there, and all the drawing that's on this piece is the drawing of its relationship with fire, and because it looked just like the piece that preceded it before it was, pretty much like that one before it was fire, and so I just wanted the fire to be just completely solid in it, and I wanted to include what most of us get to experience, and we probably resist and find horrible. And when we get through it, we're pleased and feel, we've managed to be a hero through that one. And that's all these kind of confronting life experiences. So that was sort of, and I've done a few others doing things like that. There's one little later on where I set up. They all have, sort of things. This one here where I had basically similar concerns, but I want to use explosives as the unknown, and by the time I got around to in these, as I said, you learn something as you go along, and then by the time I got to some of these, I began to realize this one. I said I wanted to have the unknown in. I was very clear it wanted unknown, but I immediately, as soon as I said that, I set off on this great adventure in getting to know everything I possibly could ever know about any of it. And so there was concrete, and there's plaster, and then there was explosives. They're the main kind of things that were used in it. And I called all these plaster people. I found out the stress of things, what would absorb impact of explosives, what I could do. I mean, I tried to make it as known as I could make it. And I did the same thing with the concrete. And I found out about the explosives. And the explosives, what I needed with the explosives was low intensity, high impact explosives, like a grenade, or and it would knock the walls and make them collapse on the inside if the explosives was in the inside, and it wouldn't affect the structure. And so, I built it all into the piece. I overbuilt it into the piece. I had, between the concrete and the plaster, I had sandwiched a layer of vermiculite with a little bit of plaster to hold it as a cushion for the explosives. I mean, I really...
How did you actually do the explosion in this piece?
Oh, well, after I got all this together, one of the things in New York you can't do is use explosives. So I did what other people do to do what you want, and that is you find who else does it and how they get to do it, and you do it the same way. And so I went to the movie industry that gets to do those things, and I hired an explosives expert from the movie industry. And this is a little job. He was working with Woody Allen doing a much bigger job. He used to burn buildings and do things like that, but he was an explosives expert. And we talked, and I got everything straight, and I built the piece according to all these things that I got straight, and everything was great, and the time was coming to do it, and the day that it was supposed to take place, we talked on the phone, and what he said that he did is he decided to subcontract the job. It was easier. That, you know, for him to go and to what you have to do to buy explosives in New York is you have to go and you have to get it, you have to be licensed to do it and all that, and you have to sign out what you get. You use some of it, and then you have to come back and sign back in what you didn't use. And so what he did is he subcontracted the police department, the bomb squad, to do this little tiny job. Well, they would only deal with reliable clients, and I wasn't one of them. He was one, so they wouldn't talk to me. I wasn't who employed them. And so we went out, and you know, I assumed, we talked about it enough that it had all gotten very clear. Well, in this sort of subcontracting job, what was missing were the ingredients for the kind of explosives that I needed. Because this was a very simple little operation that I had in mind. And anyway, it wasn't on the truck, right? And so we went out, and so they put the explosives in, and I got to press the button just like this, boom, at a great distance, and nothing happened. I did such a good job, you say, building it. And then I got to go boom again, and nothing happened, boom again, and nothing happened, boom again, and nothing happened. And it was really built quite well. It was an easy job. They knew it was an easy job. And so they didn't want to take it off the flatbed truck that I was using, that we took it out to this place. And so I heard somebody say, "We'll get it this time." And so the next boom, it boomed, and it knocked out the electricity in the whole truck. It knocked a hole down through the truck. One section went 20 feet away. And it didn't do what I wanted to do, but it definitely went boom. It was supposed to implode and just hit the walls, and what happens, it exploded because it was a high-intensity, low-impact explosive was being used, and it blows the structure. So the walls were great. They looked great. It just blew the structure of it, and so it knocked it all apart. So I went home with a lot of rubble. And I realized instantly that I got what I asked for. I got the unknown, and I was obviously terrified, but I got it. I did everything I could to make it known, you see, and I got what I asked for. And I realized that you always get what you asked for. It just doesn't look like what you thought you asked for. So I got home with all this and looked at it for a month or so, and the experience of doing that was so incredibly huge in my life. I mean, it was just like I was blown apart when it went apart. I mean, I just felt so vulnerable. It was incredible. Anyway, but what I felt that I actually had experienced were the kind of metaphors for war and all those kind of things. And after getting, just hanging out with it long enough, what I felt all there is to do after that is what one does do after war, and that's you reconstruct. And so myself and this other person, we worked very hard putting concrete back into square. Not an easy job. I peeled back part of the concrete, and when it exploded, the windows opened like flowers. So we just pressed it all back in, and I put another layer of steel around it to strengthen it, and I put another layer of concrete on it. And
That's
so
the result.
This is the result. The inside is all collapsed. Inside the inside layers, two walls have like the most beautiful drawing of specks of the explosive that kind of shot, shrapnel or whatever, that shot into the plaster walls, and two of them collapsed, and what I have, I don't know, about 5 or 6 layers of different plasters in it, and they were made to release, and I put layers of gold in some of them, and fluorescent pigment and whatever, in some of the others to help release the plaster. And so on two of the walls you have, collapsing so that you have little bits of gold in it. And two of the other ones, the ones that get hit the most by the explosive, because the explosive sat in one corner more towards two walls, you see the understructure under it, which were lath, and it went right down to the lath, so two are of that. And so it's quite quiet when you look inside. You see what happened, and the outside simply holds it there. So, so I felt like I learned a lot in doing that. As I said, what you do when you make these pieces, it just seems like a kind of fleeting, nice idea when you thought about it. But when you make them very real, what happens is the experience of them becomes very real in your life. And just like many large experiences in your life, they reveal a lot of things to you through, what you've gone through in the process of making them. This one was quite big. And it was one of the things that I learned is that I would like to kind of scale it down a little bit, make it more manageable. And so some of the others that have come along after this one, like this one, I used an aspect of fire, not this sort of great confrontation with it, but this piece was constructed as like a plywood cube. There's about 12 inches of plywood all the way around. There's a little plywood space inside, and what I did is I used a kind of torch, and I burned it into the spherical shape. And so I use a quality of fire, which is that it can shape, you can burn away, and you can use it as a form of carving. And I carved it into this shape. And it's carved down to the point where you can see these little triangles here and there, and those little triangle shapes where they come are the spots where the interior corners of the inner cube are. So it's burnt right back to about a half an inch of the, close to that inner small room, so that the measurement of the circle and the square are almost the same. So I started using those kind of qualities. This one is a ream of paper, which is 500 sheets. The walls of the cube are these 500 sheets of paper, which are basically just wood in little thin layers. And has a thin veneer of plaster on the outside. It has a little structure of wood that's sort of holding it all together. And, I had a fire on the inside of the piece, and it burned till it burned out, and these little windows became these chimneys. And so it basically has a drawing on a very beautiful, drawing material, which is this.
Plaster.
Yeah. And so it's just showing the kind of a beautiful aspect of the fire. It wasn't out of control. I burned it in my house. I just kept a little fan blowing smoke out the window.
So it's a hollow shape now.
It's, it was a hollow shape before, but it's a ream, which is, it's about 3 inches, 3.5 inches of paper. And, fire just kind of curls it up like it does burn your Sunday Times if you put it in the fireplace. And they just burn and burn and burned until it sort of suffocated itself. And meanwhile, it burned out these windows. This wood here that it was around is very soft, and it burned very easily. And as the inside just burned very easily, it didn't make any difference. You burned 1 layer or 100 layers. It always looked the same on the inside because it would just burn up a sheet of paper. It just evaporate the piece of paper. So what you get to see most is you'll always just get one sheet of paper that had some drawn line on it, and it burned these windows, and this, whatever the accumulation of smoke and fire was, this just left sort of as a drawing on it. So anyway, they're just sort of aspects of it. And anyway, along that line, I wanted to put things through other things as well. And one of the things that I did with this one, I don't know particularly why this interested me. I think that's part of just sort of following where it takes you, and you sort of learn afterwards where you've been. Right? Anyway, this piece was, I wanted to put it through an event, the event which reforms the piece, much like these others have. They either reform the kind of drawing quality that you see in it, or the event that it's gone through that it records. This one was built so that it was a cube, a plaster cube that I had many very fine layers, quarter-inch layers, and it was built to the inside, and the innermost layer was this yellow plaster. And it was very, very sturdy. And when I finished doing it, what I did is I sort of broke the thing apart, and what all these are the layers of how it originally fit together, and then it was just completely turned inside out and put back together again. And so, you know, when I did it, I was interested, first off, what you can see within this sort of simple cube, all these sort of slightly pyramided, and the stepping of it, this, you know, all happened inside that cube. And it's sort of a metaphor for what happens again in one's life, is you simply get to be turned inside out. And you know, perhaps after those events, you might be more beautiful than you were before, or the beauty is certainly different. And so I was interested in putting them through kind of stress tests of sorts. So the inside of this is white, as it, and similar here. And when I got around to making this piece, I said what I kept wanting to do is to use aspects of it rather than using the whole huge thing of confronting the explosives again. And so this piece is solid wood on the inside, and what I want to do is deal with the different aspects, possible aspects of fire. And so the inside, much like I burned that sphere of wood, this one with fire I carved out a negative sphere on the inside. And so it's, again, the quality of fire that it can shape. And so it was burned and scraped and to get it into a spherical shape. And the outside, I wanted to have that kind of sumptuous beauty, the kind of, you know, and so the wood I've layered, much like lacquer boxes are made, in this very fine way so you could see into the color and have the real sumptuousness that fire has. And the mirror, I wanted to have that kind of disappearing quality, and basically it makes the whole piece sort of disappear. And then, you know, just allows you to go in and see, you know, the kind of little more physical aspect of what the fire does inside.
What's, of course, so amazing to, I'm sure, many of us sitting here is that these pieces which seem so contained and which seem to be so almost sedate have gone through this kind of torturing process and this form of transformation, in some cases very violently. But none of that is evidentially clear, or it's only evidentially clear in the most subtle way. And that's one of the things that makes the pieces so mysterious and so impressive.
Well, by the time I had these many encounters with these events, putting pieces through these events, one of the things that I kind of got interested in is that, well, it wasn't a new idea to me. It was sort of developing. In some way, what you experience when you go and see a work, or what attracts you to go there, want to be, it's not like it's going to be something new there. It's like when you go to see your very dear old friend that you just love forever, you know, and they're the same old friend, they're the same old stories, right? You love them dearly, there's nothing new, you know, and you keep making plans to see them, you know, and you like new people because they're interesting, exciting, but really there's nothing quite like those old shoes. You go back, you just sort of love them, you know, and it's like a place that you've etched in your life, in your heart, right? You've already etched it, and you've made a kind of inroad to these feelings for yourself, and they simply are there as a way for you to get and give and share those experiences of yourself. And so so I've sort of got to think after a while that it hardly makes any difference what an artwork looks like. It's just that what you wanted to do is it becomes a container that holds something, and what you want is that thing that it holds. And just like, these images of people come and go. I mean, it's the same person. It's not like you're going to see something new. And they contain something. It's that thing they contain that keeps having you come back. And so I was sort of going on the assumption that I would like to see if that were true, right? So rather than change an image, well, I've been working with those things anyway, but rather than have the attention on the image, even though you always bring all your sort of skills and interests and loves and whatever's with you, so it's just going to be there anyway, it's not going to run away, but to not have the attention there, to simply have the attention someplace else. And so when I got around to this piece, I had tried to make this piece for about 5 years and could never figure out how to do it. And I've made many tests to do it, and they all failed. Anyway, so at the point where I was around that time, what I wanted to do is, rather than bringing like form and force together and just sort of live through the moment of when they had that moment together, what I began to think is that I would just sort of set something up within myself and see if it got to be experienced out there in the piece, regardless of what it looked like. Who cares what it looked like? Of course you are going to care what it is, but nevertheless, all you want is what that thing contains. And so what I was getting to come around to is that I had to contain it before it got to be contained over there, And so what I just sort of randomly testing myself in the work and whatever, thought I would do is that I would, I had this friend told me, I know a person who can really help you out with this piece. You really could do this, right? I had 1 month till I had a show coming up, and I just figured, oh well, what have I got to lose? The money it cost me to get it together, my time, or I could possibly have a piece, right? So why not go for it? So the person so what I thought I wanted to do with the piece is to kind of practice surrendering to it, much like, the wood surrenders to the fire, and you just see what happens, right? You sort of know what's going to happen, but you get to kind of experience seeing what happens and just being there with it. So I just sort of like a light little idea, like the light little idea I had about having explosives, You didn't know what it would happen. Anyway, so this seemed like harmless enough, blue sphere. Anyway, so the person that was so highly recommended came. I have a very poor ear for any slight variation on English, and the person had a really heavy Yugoslavian accent. And now, it was many years later, I sort of understand him a good lot, but at that point I could not understand a word he had to say to me. And so I just figured, oh well, here's the first chance I get to surrender, right? And I decided I just do it, to see, right? Why not? So it couldn't be any worse than the explosive experience, and I figured it'd probably be better. Well, what was interesting is that he was this expert at mold making, and he never had anything go wrong, right? He's really good. Well, I can't tell you how many things went wrong when he worked with me. The very first thing that happens, we made a positive, which is a sphere that's hand-carved in shape, and it fell apart. Never happens with him. It fell apart. We had to reconstruct it, so it had a second run through. We got it. And so then we were going to cast a negative shape. We put the stuff on the surface so that it would release when we got it out. It tore the surface of the mole off, and so then we had to completely re-hand build the mole. These ticked away many hours, many days, and then we cast it, and it took many hours to cast it. There were about 6 or 7 of us, and we put in 37 hours doing it. And some time went by, we let it sit there, and we took it out of the mole, and the mole pulled the surface off the whole thing. He was my expert, right? These little stupid, silly things happened. And so in the end, I put in another chunk of 2 days together with him, and we hand-built the whole outer surface of the piece. And I had done lots of tests to get this blue, and we had, I mean, a lot to get this blue exactly the way it is. And so after working on it something like 30 hours, what happened is the piece turned penny copper brown. This was a lot of time. I was completely exhausted from days worth of it. And so I spent, in my process of surrendering to all this, right, I started talking myself into a penny copper. Oh, this is what I really wanted. I thought I wanted a blue piece, but really I guess it was a penny copper piece. Oh, well. At that point there was only like 3 days till the show. So, I mean, there was another person there. It wasn't me hallucinating all by myself, right? We looked at it. He talked to me about this penny copper. I don't know what went wrong. I'm sorry, right? He had said that to me many times. Anyway, we went home, and I came back, I don't know, 8 hours later, and I couldn't believe it. The piece was maroon. It was maroon. If you look at it, you can sort of begin to see, if you look really into the blue, that it has this sort of little maroony colors in it. And another 8 hours later, it was beginning to turn blue. And by the time the show was over with, it was this color again. And somehow the burnishing of it, or what was used with the burnishing, affected the color. And it just did it right till the very last second. And, who would have believed? Right. Anyway, so I felt like after I set up what I want to do, to surrender to that, it provided me with many opportunities to do that. And so when I finished the piece, when it finally turned blue, I couldn't believe how euphoric that experience was, right? But there were so many stopping spots, and I think that what I've learned in that, again, is that what you set yourself up for, what you want to learn, or where the piece is going to take you, will take you there anyway, and you simply just sort of get to watch it. And what the piece holds in and of itself is it doesn't really much make any difference what it looks like. It's simply there, it's contained within it, and you simply go back to it because it contains it. So, that was quite. Pardon? It's about this tall.
3 feet or so? Or
about 32 inches, 32 inches. It's about, 1,000 pounds.
Now, we have a couple more slides. I want to ask you one question when we finish the slides, and then there may be some questions from the audience, too.
Okay. Do you want me to go through some more?
Oh, this is great.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the other piece, which is at Equitable, which is just a beautiful piece. You can see it on 52nd, 51st, on 7th at the Whitney Museum at Equitable.
I think that's the last one.
Thank you.
Can we turn that?
Yeah. Just want to ask Jackie one question. Now, it's a little bit about a system that you have for the ownership of your works. Could you describe that system and what that system basically, why you evolved that system, given your understanding of the world of art and of collectors? And then we can collect questions on cards, or I can just pick people out to answer their questions, to have Jackie answer their questions. So let's just have Jackie answer this question, then we'll move to you.
I assume you're referring to this contract I used.
Jackie has a contract system which she'll explain.
Well, I haven't been using it recently, but I used it up until about 3 years ago, something like that. And early pieces that I made may have taken like a quarter year, half a year. One of the first pieces I sold was one that took me 6 months to make. And I'm sure that everybody's very familiar with these sort of ideas, but somehow making them has no kind of equation financially. But the equation was so ridiculous. I could have paid them for taking it or something. It was so ridiculous. The exchange. It seemed to me that exchange had nothing to do with anything except a little kind of support. So that was fine with me that somebody would support you that way to buy a piece. It just seemed to me that at some point later on, if there was another kind of support, that we could share that at some other point. And so I made a contract for the early pieces that I sold that if they're resold, I would share 15% of the profit from resale. And the reason that I want to do it is not just that. It's I suppose it's idealism, but I didn't want to go. There's enough problems one have in life. This seemed one that was more simply dealt with. I didn't want to kind of go into my life knowing that I would feel badly about something later, and if I could do something then about it, why not do it then about it? And so I just did something about it then. And so I did that, and the result of it is that I've gotten the most incredibly dedicated group of people that own my work. And it was, I got married to every one of them. It seemed like, the process of who ended up owning the pieces, by the time you went through the process, whatever it was, just to kind of get over both of your nervousness about it, just weeded out any difficulty that might ever arise. And I would never even think of questioning anything about them, and I would just run over and fix anything if it needed, right? But it seemed like it took care of a lot of things in there because I got to feel, I felt good about the people who bought the pieces or the institutions that bought the pieces. And concerns that kind of come up early on when you make work is how the work would be treated or related to or handled. And all you want is that it's sort of treated or related to or handled just respectably. Not there's anything, beyond that to any great degree. And in the process of going through this issue of money and contract, right, you get to kind of know them. And so your confidence in how they would deal with that respectively just evolved in it. So I did that until the pieces simply got to be expensive enough that I thought the money that was involved in the purchase of them would function in the same way. And so then it just seemed like they'd kind of be on their own. And the pieces simply would be protected by how much they cost to buy. So a few years ago, it seemed like that time had been reached, and so I discontinued using them, because it seemed handled at that point.
Thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Much of what appeals to you in doing your work is the process, but the communication, what one as a viewer sees is the end result. Unless one has the benefit of an understanding from you or someone else, one doesn't really get the feel of the process. So how do you feel about the difficulty of communication of the process when that's so important to you? The other question I have is about whether Joseph Beuys has been any influence on your work.
Could everyone hear the question? What role does process play in your work if, in fact, some of the extraordinary ideas that have gone through in the process of making your pieces aren't communicated at the first glance in their perception? That was the first question. The second question, does Joseph Beuys play any role in the development of your sensibility?
If you remember the second one, I'll try to address the first one. I don't think I'm sort of interested in process as a display. It's the kind of means to an end, and the end is it isn't. My interest really isn't expressing anything. It's creating something that visually quiets you down and slows you down. I don't know, that word expressing, I've come to wonder what it means. I think that you see enough. What's available to people is available to them through their own experience. So what's available to me about Patterson comes from how much I get to know him, and through my own sensibility, what reveals itself to me, what I'm able, of what he has, what I'm able to kind of hone out of it. I can't get a whole bunch that somebody else may get. Someone studied a lot of art history or something, maybe they can kind of get a lot more. I don't have any of that. I can't get that somebody who knows something over here could get something else. You get somehow something that mirrors part of yourself. So I don't think there's a way that you're ever meant to get all of it, or, whatever. And so, I don't know, it seems to me the process of doing it is important. The process of doing everything we do in our life is important, but I don't think it's any more important than anything else, any more important than, say, the process of painting is important to a painting. However, it needs to go through something to have it made, and one thing that does seem important to me is to make the pieces myself. And the reason I make the pieces myself, which seems to be more about what the question might be about, is because, for me anyway, is that that's where I get to learn the most about them, and engage in that exchange that I've been talking about. And I think that to the degree that other people are involved in that exchange, those things become available to them. I don't feel a lot of it's about how much you get to see. And it is there to see if you look, or if you have some way to make that available to yourself. And the one about Boyce.
Joseph Boyce.
Well, I didn't know Joseph Boyce or his work at all in any of the formative years in my work. However, I love it. I think it's wonderful. I mean, I love all those kind of stories about, I feel an affinity to those stories about him and the lard when he crashed and the airplane was wrapped in lard, and you could see how huge that experience must have been in his life, and how, because it was huge in his life, that hugeness got just channeled right into the use of those materials that he selected to work with. So I feel enormous affinities, certain areas of his work, but I don't particularly feel influenced by them.
Other questions or responses? Yes.
What actually was the blue sphere? What is it stone? What did you make it out of? Plaster or what?
It's highly burnished acrylic altered concrete, and it has cyanide blue in it. It's saturated concrete. It's it's saturated through it.
Yes.
No, I didn't have trouble with it was the phthalo blue.
Yes.
You had showed a slide of a series, it looked like on canvas, of red cross squares. Could you talk about that?
This was the piece that was a kind of flayed square
Right,
that took the form of a cross that we passed through very quickly
Right.
in the two successions of slides.
The yellow cube they turned inside out was a piece that I made before that, and the interest in it was making, again, much like I spoke of in the yellow piece, actually, it's making a thing that was very solid and strong and breaking it apart and opening it up into like the most obvious form it came out in, and having the frailty, having it be what comes out of a cube again, and having go from a solid, strong, sturdy shape to a very fragile one, and it sort of displaying vulnerability. I was interested in the piece. Yeah.
Is there any reason why it was on the wall?
No, there's no real particular reason. It was just a choice I made.
It does become the most pictorial of your sculptures.
Well, it was quite a surprise to me, too. I thought it was coming out as a plus sign. I somehow dropped off one of the sides. Till all of a sudden there it was. I heard more stories about nuns after I made that piece.
Other questions? Yes.
I you worked on your pieces sequentially, like wrapped pieces all at one time, and all the cubes all at
Well, the pieces are pretty much made one at a time, and they're pretty much in the sequence that they are here. Some, may have not quite, some might have taken longer and, not been quite the perfect sequence, but they're pretty much in the sequence they're made, and they're pretty much made one right after another. Pretty much like the outdoor piece, I had some things home in my studio at the same time. But, they're pretty much in the order they were done.
Yes, in pink.
I have two questions. One is that, or a statement. A while ago at Paula Cooper, I saw one of your cubes, and the outside was burned, but the inside, when you peered in, appeared, if I remember it correctly, to have some kind of a red tile interior, or red shiny interior. Totally different from the exterior, and I couldn't see anything.
Yeah, it was here. I think the piece you're describing, it wasn't burned at all. If I'm just going on what you thought you saw on the inside, I'm not sure. It's one of two pieces that you saw.
Shiny,
Uh,
but the exterior
was burned.
was burned.
Yeah, that piece was here. Yeah, it was stepping. It was one of the cube pieces that was turned inside out. It was red on the outside originally, and the inside was burned, and it was the end. So the black was on the outside.
That piece seemed to me so almost the antithesis of what I see. It's almost as if your pieces are an analog for some cubic conditions, where the exterior is calm and serene, and the interior is tortured and convoluted, perhaps.
Could people hear what she said? Good.
And so now what questions do you want me to answer?
She just was making a statement, I believe. She feels you're tortured.
You seem like a very kind of quiet person that is self-contained and perhaps a private person, which is the feeling that comes across from your pieces as well. They're very private pieces that you must interact with on an individual, on a one-to-one basis. The viewer and the piece kind of establish a relationship that's very unique.
She feels you're wounded, but she likes you.
Thank you.
Do we have another comment? Yes.
Go on a little bit about what he said. When I saw your slides for the first time, I had the emotional feeling that I was looking at pieces that had become simple. And then when you showed it again the second time, I saw your process. I enjoyed seeing the process of how it, but I was aware when I first looked at them that they had become simpler. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, no, I understand. Yeah, they have been intentionally. Yeah. Thank you.
One more question, and then I have one quick question to end up.
You speak at all about the pieces made with brick or the wrapped, that wood that you, what is it, to protect land from wind or something?
Right, yeah, the last ones. Oh, they were made a really long time ago, and when I made the brick pieces, they were way back in 1972 or something like that. I made those pieces. I had made, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 pieces using rope, and it was one of the times that I made a very external kind of decision of what I was going to do. What I wanted to do is to stop using the rope, because I felt like it only could go so far, and it seemed to me 5 pieces was plenty, and and so, but I was really attracted to it, and I wanted to, but it just seemed I was sort of bringing myself further out on the limb, with nowhere to go in a way. And so what I just made a conscious choice in it was that I would use the qualities that I was attracted to the rope with and just simply not use the rope. And so one of the things that had attracted to me originally was all those little pieces coming together to make a whole. And so I made a number of pieces around that time which I just simply did that. One of the things I first chose was the lath stripping, and I basically made a chunk, much like a chunk of rope, out of all these little lath pieces, and I just constructed it, nailing them to each other around and around until it finally was strong enough to hold its own shape. And so it sort of wrecked this big. And one of the other things that I did is that I made a number of pieces using bricks that, for the same reasons. And I have one piece in there that's not cemented together. I had a number of them around that I simply didn't, that was one of the ones that I simply didn't put it in a kind of final form. But the domed one I did, and they were meant originally when I did those few pieces to be concreted into the shape. And it was, again, using the singular elements to make up a bigger element in the kind of more obvious form that it would take. And so having them radiate into each other, the interior of that little dome is just all bricks, and it sort of have these little paddings of concrete around it to hold the shape. And again, it was pushing the energy into the center, but it was that moment when I was doing things where I made a conscious decision that I had made enough of those pieces, and it was time to kind of push myself someplace else. And it was about the same sort of thing that I did when I started, using the fire and the explosives. Just sort of, you go in that direction, you go a bit, and then you move over there. So that they happened all around the same time.
I'd like to just end with one question, and it's a question that I've asked several other artists who've appeared on this stage. I just wanted to sense, you've now been in New York for about 20 years, in a way, and you and I talked about this recently. Could you just end, if you care to, and this is where you can make any kind of editorial you want, how you find the world that surrounds you as an artist now versus the world that surrounded you in 1969 as you made your first mature work?
Well, everything changes. When I first came to New York, I was fresh out of school, everything was new. A couple years later, when I finally got it a little in focus, and it wasn't so much about the fact that I didn't know anybody and how was I going to live and all those kind of things. The next thing that came into focus is that I was a woman, and it seemed like women were like these transparent figures. There was somebody and there was a ghost beside them or something, and so that period when I first sort of moved out into the art community, that was sort of how you sort of felt. And you'd be someplace and people would talk and you'd say something and people would talk over you, right? And so as I moved out, what also happened at the same time was the women's movement, and that was like the most incredibly lively, lots of fun time ever. It was great. These, all of a sudden, it went from no friends, no women, and to these mute ghosts, right? To all of a sudden you go to someone's loft and there'd be 100 women there, and the most outrageous gatherings, and listening to them, it was just lots of fun, right? And you heard more stories, and it was just fabulous, and there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of showing, and finally what evolved was showing, and running around, all this community running around and seeing other people's work. It was just sort of fabulous. It's so rich and nurturing, that moment from the moment before, which was so separating, sort of discouraging, and so things sort of move on always, and the flavor of things, I'm sure everybody has read every little kind of journal around commenting on it. It seems like there's a flavor. The flavor then was one of like great community and support, and it seems, that things, once again, you say they sort of almost flop over to the other side. And there's ones where, money and ownership and things like that seem, it's so antithetical to what preceded it in the community, and, bettermanship and how much mind, soul for more than your, it's just such a whole other flavor. And I'm sure, 10 years later, it'll be something else. It's changed a lot. experientially being around it. I mean, when I first came to New York, I just had this little ugly little old sink, and I had just a big open space and a shower that opened into all of it. There was a bed on the floor, and now everybody has these sort of palatial, fabulous, masterpieces of modern living, right? And so it's changed a lot, where the focus is. I mean, and myself included. I'm so busy with city codings and whether I can stay there, and real estate has sort of like forced a lot of issues into the art community. And for younger artists who are just sort of going out, I can't imagine how they pay the rent and how many times they have to divide their space up so that they can live in this little matchbox that they can afford, or how far out they have to go to get something they can afford. So that's it. I mean, when I first came to New York, you just lived in this kind of barren wasteland of rats and red lights and big warehouses. Now they're all filled. There's no more red lights and the rats have gone, and there's a lot of cars, and just looks very different. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. In January, I'll be speaking with Robert Arneson, and it is a little hard to believe that anybody ever could have talked over Jackie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.